Something Like Stories, Volume 1. Something Like, Book 7. Written by J. Bell. Narrated by Kevin R. Free at Brickshop Audio. Story number 2. Something Like Fall. Part 1. Jace, Missouri, 2003. Hey, Allison. Wish you were here. As you can tell from the back of this postcard, Missouri is called the Show Me State. I'm pretty sure that's meant ironically since there isn't much to see here. Or maybe people are desperate to see anything besides flat land and bleak highways. Show me anything. I hope Warrensburg will be more exciting. If you don't hear from me again, it's because I died of boredom. Your soon-to-be-dead best friend, Honey Buns. Ben looked up from the postcard he was scrawling on. Outside the passenger window of the rental car, a handsome man approached. Ben smirked. I told you never to call me that, not in public. Jace grinned, blue eyes sparkling. I never do, but I think I'll start. The happy expression remained. Jace seemed thrilled to be here, as if they had pulled up to a tropical resort instead of some anonymous gas station on a pockmarked highway. Jace stood by the window, brandishing pastry sealed in shrink-wrapped plastic. Honey Buns, he repeated. I didn't know they made these anymore. Ben accepted one tentatively. You always take me to the nicest places. And you always bite your nails and expect disaster. How many times have I told you not to judge a place from the highway? At least wait until we arrive. So Warrensburg is going to be amazing? A grimace broke free across Jace's face before he reined it back in. I'll make it amazing. He leaned forward, stuck his head in the window, and transformed concrete and the smell of gasoline into a little slice of heaven. By the time their lips parted, Ben was sold. He signed the postcard, then added at the very bottom, P.S. Never mind, I love it here. Jace walked around the rental car to the driver's side and got in. In the cup holders, he set the milk he had bought for himself and the Coke that Ben had requested. Then his long fingers partially unwrapped one of the pastries. He took one bite, then another, making happy little noises as he ate. Ben observed this, feeling ridiculous that something so simple could make him love Jace even more. This trip might turn out to be good for them both. Not that they were having problems. College was finally over, and even better, Ben's enormous mistake was fading to distant memory. They were healthy and happy didn't quite describe it, not for Ben, anyway. Jace always had a bounce in his step because his life was neatly organized. Flight attendant extraordinaire, a self-described astronaut of the stratosphere. He had an identity, a job to keep him occupied. All Ben had was a degree in English. A stupid, useless degree that the temp service he worked for never once asked to see. Allison had recently suggested he work at the hospital, in some sort of speech therapist position that had recently opened up. Not because he had majored in English literature, but because he could sing. He was still trying to wrap his head around that one, but she had given him a look that said, Don't question me, I know what's best for you. He had avoided giving a definitive answer by saying he would think about it while on this trip. Maybe he actually would, and finally figure it all out in the modest land of Missouri. Show me, State, he mumbled as they resumed driving. Okay, show me what I'm supposed to do. Jace said, reaching over to take his hand. The gesture would have been more romantic if his fingers weren't still sticky from the pastry. Jace seemed aware of this because he held on tighter when Ben tried to pull away, laughing mercilessly. Not that Ben really minded or struggled much. He might not be content with the rest of his life, but in his relationship, he couldn't imagine being happier. As they reached their destination, he felt much more optimistic. Warrensburg had small-town charm. The buildings worn down like comfortable furniture, the old trees stretching their branches wide, showering sidewalks and streets in crimson, orange, and gold. I miss the leaves changing colors, Jace said, sounding wistful. We get that in Austin, but not like this. It's nice, Ben conceded. Winters must be different too. Those I don't miss, Jace said, although I didn't mind so much as a kid. Sledding was fun, and so was building snowmen with Dad. He always insisted on dressing them up so they wouldn't get cold. I was in my early teens before I stopped thinking that made sense. I always felt bad for the snowmen other people built because they were naked. Ben chuckled along with him, but soon grew more somber. He was nervous, and probably without justification, because surely Jace's parents were just as wonderful as the son they had raised. Regardless, this was a major event, and one long overdue. Over the last 3 years, Jace had offered to introduce Ben to them many times, and had even booked flights on 2 separate occasions, only for fate to intervene. On the first attempt, Jace was called into work, having to cancel one flight so he could get on another. The second attempt was interrupted by Ben's mother needing emergency surgery. His father had asked him to come help take care of her, not knowing that she had already asked Ben to help take care of her husband. Life kept getting in the way, often enough that he nearly expected their flight today to be hijacked, just to prevent this meeting. And yet here they were. Jace was pointing through the windshield at invisible memories, a bike wreck on a street corner, a dog that always chased him if he tried crossing the property, and a creepy house that was purportedly haunted, although now it had been replaced by a block of apartments. Ben tried to pay attention and nodded to show he was listening. In truth, his thoughts were racing. Jace's parents would be good people, but what if they thought he wasn't? Jace was so damn perfect, would they also expect him to be? He was about to find out. They drove through a sleepy neighborhood, cruising around a lake to get there. Jace pulled over briefly, nodding across the water to a valley where a number of houses were perched on the sloping land. "That one right there," he said. The house was 3 stories high with a large wooden deck that jutted out. Huge trees surrounded it, producing the autumn leaves that were tumbling gracefully through the air. Perfection. The entire house and the family within were perfect. Ben felt sure of it. He broke out into a light sweat as they parked in the driveway. 2 people appeared at the front door. Jace's parents were older. Ben knew that from photographs he had seen. Mrs. Holden had silvery hair gathered in a single braid that rested over one shoulder. She was tall and thin, like a graceful goddess. Mr. Holden was pudgier and mostly bald on top, thick glasses perched on the end of his nose. He didn't appear perfect from the outside, but he probably spoke 10 languages and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of wine and classical music. Jace was already out of the car. Ben unbuckled his seatbelt with numb fingers, opened the door, and stumbled to his feet. He watched Jace hug his parents, the exchange of happy words lost on him as he tried to find his own, something that would impress them. A quote. From literature. Hey, maybe that English degree wasn't so useless after all. "I am only human," he blurted out, "although I regret it." This was met with a puzzled silence. "Mark Twain said that," Ben supplied helpfully. "Only human," Mr. Holden repeated, offering him a hand. "I'm glad to hear it. We were starting to worry Jace would marry that cat of his." "Don't be ridiculous," Jace retorted. "Samson is a confirmed bachelor. That's the lifestyle he has chosen for himself. Besides, who said anything about marriage?" Ben relaxed somewhat. Jace might be perfect, but he was also weird, meaning Ben's little outbursts probably wouldn't be remembered. Hopefully. "I'm Ben," he tried again. "Nice to finally meet you." "I'm Serena." Jace's mother stepped close, placing her hands on his shoulders as she looked him up and down. He saw no criticism in her eyes, only delight. "I've waited so long for this." "You and me both," Ben said with a chuckle. He opened his arms to hug her. A moment later, he was pulled aside so Jace's father could do the same. "I'm Bob," the man said after releasing him. "Do you eat meat?" Ben blinked. "Yeah, of course." "I told you." Bob waggled a finger at his wife. "Just because he worked at a vegetarian restaurant doesn't mean he is one. Now we're stuck eating bean balls for lunch." "Falafel," Serena corrected, arching one of her eyebrows slightly. Ben knew that expression. It was the same one Jace used when Ben was acting up. "Please, come inside." Bob put an arm around Ben's shoulders, guiding him in. "Welcome home, son." "We're not married yet," Jace complained from behind. "And you wonder why it took 3 years for this to happen." Ben was ushered into the dining room, and once seated at the table, it really was like being part of the family. When he asked for ketchup, instead of anyone leaping up to fetch it for him, he was sent to dig around in the refrigerator and get it for himself. Formality and friendliness rarely coexist, and it was clear which Jace's parents valued more. Conversation was casual and easy. Ben treated like he'd always been a member of the family. By the time dinner was over, he felt comfortable in Bob and Serena's presence and eager to prove himself worthy. He hopped up to clear the table. Jace helped and followed him into the kitchen. They worked together at the sink, standing side by side. "What do you think?" Jace asked when passing him a freshly rinsed dish. Ben placed it in the dishwasher. "I think I'm in love." "With me?" "With the whole package. You, the town, your family. Let's pack our bags and move." "Easy now," Jace said, handing over a drinking glass. "Give it a few days. My parents are fine, but you might want to hold off on saying nice things about the town." "What's so bad about it?" Jace shut off the water and turned to lean against the counter. "There's never anything to do, so chronic boredom is an issue. But what really bothered me was—" He struggled to find the exact reason, his smile subtle when he spoke again. "You weren't here. That's why I had to leave. I was looking for you." "So romantic," Ben said breathily as he shut the dishwasher. Then he pretended his legs were weak, swaying like he was losing his balance. "I might need smelling salts." "Too much," Jace said. "I was trying to woo you." Ben grew serious. "There's no such thing as too much, not when it comes to you." "That's good," Jace said, pulling him close, "because we're sleeping on the couch tonight, and it's going to be a very, very tight squeeze." As if to demonstrate this, Jace squeezed him, hard enough that Ben cried out. "Actually," Serena said, "your sister's old room is now a guest room." Ben yelped in surprise, not having noticed her arrival. Jace relaxed his grip. Ben tried not to blush as he moved away. He failed. "It's very private," Serena continued, seeming amused by this display. Then, as an aside, she added, "Thank goodness for that." Jace looked puzzled. "I thought we'd stay in my old room." Serena shook her head. That's your father's new office." "He took over my old bedroom?" Jace said, nearing a whine. Ben tried not to laugh. He knew all too well how easily parent and child roles reasserted themselves. "I'm not picky. All I need is a couch and a blanket." Jace continued to pout. "What does he need an office for? He's retired." "You know how your father is," Serena said, sounding slightly exhausted. "He likes to keep busy, and I need his mess confined to one room." "What about my old things?" "They're in the closet. You didn't leave much here." Serena pursed her lips briefly. "You're a grown man now. I didn't think you'd mind." "Of course not," Jace said, shooting Ben a self-conscious gaze. Then, as if trying to save face, he added, "I just wish you had waited until I was here. I could have helped move the heavier items." "Somehow we managed," Serena replied. "I'm going to fix myself a coffee. Would you like one?" "No, I thought I'd drag Ben out into this gorgeous weather and show him the lake. Do you mind?" "Not at all. There aren't any plans until tomorrow when your sister and her family arrive. You boys have fun." "We always do." Jace grabbed Ben by the hand, leading him toward the back door. "Come along, honey buns. If we don't go fishing, there won't be anything to eat for dinner." First impressions are of the utmost importance, which always seemed weird to Ben because he found them so unreliable. The lake was a perfect example. Up close, the body of water was much less impressive than from far away. In fact, it was barely more than a pond. Jace didn't grow up water skiing or sunbathing on the deck of a yacht. Only the smallest of fishing boats could navigate this lake comfortably, and that would first require traversing one of the decayed wooden docks. Similarly, the home of Jace's parents wasn't illustrious or excessive. Sure, the house was spread out over 3 stories, but the interior was of fairly average size. The rooms contained within were all practical and necessary, or at least would have been for parents raising 2 kids. Few families had a valley and lake behind their home, but these too were likely chosen with children in mind, since they made a nice playground. Jace's parents didn't seem the type to worry about their image or social status. The lake was equally humble. Only the shore closest to the neighborhood was maintained. The far side was overgrown, forcing them to walk slowly and choose their steps carefully. Jace filled this time by sharing more childhood memories, such as learning to ice skate on the lake's frozen surface. His father had taught him how, his mother constantly worried about the ice not being thick enough. He was in the middle of describing a nasty fall he'd taken when they reached the edge of the forest. There they paused. Jace grew silent, his story forgotten as he stared into the dark depths. "What's in there?" Ben asked. "Ghosts," Jace answered. "Maybe even a werewolf." "Sounds like fun," Ben said, taking a step forward. Jace grabbed his shoulder. "It'll be dark soon. We better not wander too far." His advice was sound. The sun had set by the time they finished circling the lake and returned inside. Jace had been joking about needing to fish, but Ben wasn't too concerned either way. Lunch had been late, and he dreaded the idea of packing in another meal. Evidently, he wasn't alone in this feeling, because only light snacks had been prepared and set out on the coffee table in the living room. The family gathered there, the vibe casual, everyone engaged in their own task while still interacting. Jace flipped through channels on the TV, making fun of local commercials. Serena brushed a cat on her lap, another one taking its place when the first hopped down. Bob browsed a newspaper, reading aloud whenever he found something interesting. The mood was made even more mellow when Bob poured 3 glasses of whiskey, Serena opting for wine. Ben was content to ignore his drink and quietly observe everyone, deciphering which traits Jace had inherited from which parent. The good looks came from his mother, thankfully, although Ben amused himself by imagining Jace going bald and donning a pair of thick spectacles like his father. A love for animals and a graceful nature came from his mother, too. All the eccentric stuff and a love of reading came from Bob. Jace was lucky, having gotten the best of both worlds. Heck, Ben was lucky, because he got to spend his life with this man. He looked over at his boyfriend, who raised his empty glass, jangling the ice. Ben had barely touched his, not really enjoying the taste. He made a pleading face and, making sure they weren't being watched, exchanged his glass for Jace's. Of course, when that one was emptied, another round was poured. Once again, Jace was drinking for 2, but he seemed to handle it well. Mostly. He was a little wobbly when they finally decided to retire. The guest room was on the bottom floor. Jace collapsed onto the bed, then propped himself up on his elbows to look around. Michelle's old room. I wish they had left it the way it was. He turned his head to the high-seat window and chuckled. You have no idea how many boys snuck in through there at night. For her, Ben said. Unfortunately, although there was this one guy. Ben took in the shit-eating grin and shook his head. You're drunk. I'm going to get ready, then we're going to bed. Sounds like a plan, Jace said, still leering at him. Ben waited until he was in the connecting bathroom before allowing himself a smile. This should be an interesting evening. He'd never seen Jace so intoxicated. Maybe it would add extra spice to their sex life. Ben made sure he was squeaky clean, even flossing and using mouthwash before he returned to the bedroom. When he did, he found it empty. He waited, thinking Jace had gone for a glass of water or something. After 10 minutes passed without his return, Ben decided to investigate. The house was dark now. Ben felt like one of those boys sneaking in the window for love. That brought back a few memories of his own, but he shoved them aside as he went upstairs. Kitchen, dining room, and front room were all empty. The next set of stairs led to a hallway. He hesitated, because one of these doors opened to the master bedroom, and if he chose wrong, the situation would be really awkward. "Hello again, Mr. and Mrs. Holden. Just wanted to say goodnight." Right. He nibbled on a fingernail, considering each door until he noticed a sliver of light from the closest one. Seeing that it wasn't completely shut, he crept forward to peek inside. The trappings of a messy office met his eye, as did familiar blonde hair over the edge of a desk, partly concealed behind a stack of paper. He pushed the door open and entered. Jace was sitting on the floor, surrounded by a number of items he had dragged from the closet. Ben was about to speak when he heard a sniff, the wet kind, normally reserved for a bad cold, or crying. Jace wasn't sick, so... "You all right?" Jace hurriedly wiped at his face, then looked over his shoulder and forced a grin. "Yeah, just going through some of my old stuff." Ben approached and looked over his shoulder. In a battered shoebox was a notebook, a carving of a wooden lion, and a handful of photos. Jace was holding one of them, and after hesitating, he held it up so Ben could see. The picture revealed a punky guy who was pulling on a cigarette, his amused eyes reflecting the burning ember. "Is that him?" Ben asked, sitting on the carpet. "Is that Victor?" Jace looked over in surprise. "You remember his name?" "Hey, I pay attention when you talk. This guy was like your Tim, right? The lesson you had to learn." He reached for the photo. Jace handed it to him. "Yeah, that's him." "He's cute," Ben said, ignoring a stir of jealousy. They were both allowed to have a past, and considering what he'd done in their present a few months back, Ben definitely wasn't one to judge. It's just that Jace had gotten weepy while looking at this photo. Punks are hot. I dated a guy in Chicago sort of like this, right before we met, but he wasn't as... Hey, are his eyes mismatched? Jace smiled. "Yeah, I thought it was freaky when I first met him. I grew to love it." Love. Strong word. Ben handed back the photo and reached for the others. "Do you mind?" "Go ahead." Most were of Victor from different angles. Always in the same jacket, always with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. With one exception. In that one, he was grinning, the expression matched by the lanky guy with shoulder-length hair who was standing next to him. Ben stared. Then he started laughing. "Your hair!" "Shut up," Jace said, trying to swipe the picture from him, but his drunken reflexes were too slow. "It's so pretty," Ben said, still laughing. "Holy crap! You must have spent an hour each morning just brushing it." "He liked it," Jace taunted. "I like it too," Ben lied. "Good, because I'm growing it out again." Ben blanched. That's what I thought." Jace managed to snatch away the photo and brought it close to his face. "The 90s, he said, shaking his head while staring at his younger self. Then his eyes moved to Victor, and he grew solemn again. He dropped the photo in the box and dug around, pulling out an old Zippo lighter. "So dumb," he mumbled, seemingly to himself. "What is?" "This." Jace gestured to the box. "It's all that's left, this and a Halloween mask back home. Don't throw it out if you ever find it." Ben furrowed his brow, still not understanding. "How much did you drink, exactly?" Jace flicked open the lighter, one finger spinning the wheel, but it no longer sparked. "He was an important person to me. Now he's just a box of junk. Makes you wonder if we all end up that way." "I'm already multiple boxes. You should see how much stuff Allison saved from when we were younger. She could open a museum, not that anyone would want to..." He trailed off because Jace was wiping his eyes again. One tear managed to break free, a wet streak trailing down his cheek. Ben struggled to remember if he'd ever seen Jace cry, even during a movie. Hey, it's okay. It's not junk, and it's not dumb. These things help you remember. It's the memories that count. You've got yours, and Victor has his. Hell, I bet he has a box full of Jace paraphernalia. Ever give him a lock of your hair? Jace spluttered laughter and shook his head. No. Well, don't worry. I'm sure on occasion he drinks too much whiskey and gets all emotional about you, too. Jace met his eye. I get it now. What you did. I understand why it happened. Ben swallowed. He knew exactly what Jace was talking about, but he asked anyway. Why I did what? Why you cheated on me with Tim. Ben's throat constricted. Technically, we were taking a break when that happened. But I'm sorry. I wish I could undo it all. I hate that it's still... Jace raised a hand to stop him. Don't feel bad. Those first loves, they get in deep, like a tattoo. They get under your skin, and no matter how faded they grow over time, no matter how much the edges blur, they're still there when you look down. And sometimes you remember how vibrant they used to be. Ben groped around in his mind for a response, but couldn't find words among the growing clutter of jealousy and insecurity. He knew he deserved this because he had been reminded of that vibrancy when he met Tim again and acted on those feelings. Doing so had put Jace through hell, but somehow he was able to forgive. Now Ben knew why, and he supposed he was okay with it, but nothing prepared him for what Jace said next. I want him back. As a friend? As a lover? Did he want to be with Victor again? Ben couldn't deny him that. Fair was fair, but it would mean they would have to take another break, and the thought alone made his chest ache. Are you unhappy with us? With me? Jace looked surprised. I didn't mean it like that. He tossed the lighter back in the box. I just wish he was more than these things. I wish he was still part of my life. He reached for the lid, closed the box, and stood. With his foot, he nudged it back into the closet. Enough. Let's call it a night. Ben rose and followed him out of the office and back downstairs. Jace collapsed onto the bed after Ben helped him get undressed. Once they were both beneath the sheets, Jace threw an arm around him and promptly fell asleep. Not Ben, though. His eyes remained open for quite some time, staring unfocused at the shadows on the wall. Ben was mostly silent during breakfast the next morning, providing Jace with the opportunity to clarify last night's discussion. Now that he was sober, maybe he would make more sense, or at least chase away the concerns gnawing at Ben's insides. Jace didn't speak much as they showered together, and at the breakfast table he ate slowly, wincing occasionally. A hangover. Did that mean he had been too drunk to remember anything? Quite a night, Ben said as he helped Jace carry dishes to the kitchen. Last night, he added, just in case there was any confusion. I overdid it, Jace admitted, nothing else though. You seemed pretty emotional before bed. Jace blinked a few times. Did I? Yeah, remember? The doorbell rang, causing Jace to grimace. That can't be my sister already. Loud voices soon confirmed it was. Ben kept watching Jace, who seemed to think the conversation had reached its natural conclusion. So maybe he didn't remember. Was that a good thing? Alcohol tended to strip away the layers, revealing what lurked beneath the surface. The fact remained that Jace still loved Victor. That was okay. That he wanted him back, was so distraught over it, that was cause for alarm. Ben understood, though. He still thought of Tim, probably more often than he should, but he had taken Jace's advice. Tim was part of his past now. Ben had made his peace with that. The noise from the front room invaded the kitchen, a hyperactive 5-year-old barreling into Ben's legs and then Jace's. This was Preston's version of a hug, and it only lasted the briefest of seconds. Then he noticed a cat and chased it down the stairs to the family room. Emma arrived next, chubby cheeks rosy as she smiled at them. Her mother, Michelle, was right behind her, holding a sleepy 3-year-old boy. Jace's sister, nephews, and niece. Ben had met them before since they lived in Houston. He had worn himself out playing with the kids every 4th of July, except last year, when busy schedules and relentless rain had put a damper on their plans. Seeing how big the kids were getting reminded him of how long it had been. "Huh, Uncle Ben?" Emma held out her arms for a hug, and Ben was happy to comply. Still, she was 8, a little old to still have pronunciation issues. While hugging her, he glanced up at Michelle, who seemed somewhat embarrassed. Emma went next to Jace, repeating the ritual with the same strange pronunciation, Unca. Then she went to the door leading to the deck, turning to tacitly seek permission from her mother. "It's lovely out today," Michelle said. "Let's all go." A moment later, they were seated on the wooden deck together and enjoying the morning sun. Everyone but Jace, who was shielding his eyes. "I should have warned you," Michelle said, tittering. "Dad pours them extra strong these days." "You're not kidding." Jace looked pale, then a little green when Preston decided to crawl over him and ended up kneeing his stomach. "Greg blacked out last time we were here," Michelle said. "Ended up in your old room, like you two were having a sleepover." Ben looked to Jace, searching for a reaction. A triggered memory. Instead, Jace winced when one of the kids started yelling. "How did you get here so early?" he murmured. "Did you fly?" "We drove. We got into town late last night and went straight to the Trout House." Ben chuckled at the name, glancing across the valley at a house perched on the opposite side. That's where Greg grew up, Jace's best friend, and the person who eventually married his sister. How quaint was that? Michelle had literally married the boy next door, or at least the one across the valley. "Just be glad they have lots of space over there," she continued. "Otherwise, we'd all be stuffed into my old bed." Jace didn't respond, more concerned with stopping Preston from clambering over him a second time. He grabbed his nephew under the armpits when he got close, lifted him up, and set him on the other side of his lawn chair. This instantly became a game, with Preston wanting to be lifted back and forth. After a few minutes of this, Jace rose. "I think I'm going to lie down again, just for a little while." "Headache or hangover?" Michelle asked. "Both." Jace paused, looking at Ben. "You'll be all right?" "Around your family? God, no." Michelle laughed. Jace seemed relieved. Then he left. "Wow," she said. "I haven't seen him that wrecked since we were teenagers." "Did he drink a lot back then?" Ben asked, already knowing where he intended to steer the conversation. "Not too much. We used to steal Dad's whiskey, which was disgusting," Michelle added when she noticed Emma listening. "Honey, go watch out for your brothers. Make sure they don't wander too far." Emma shrugged as if it was no concern of hers, but she went to find the boys anyway. "Did you guys ever have parties?" Ben asked. "Like with lots of friends?" "No, not really. I had some birthday parties, but not what you're thinking. Jace mostly just had Greg. Does 2 dorky guys running around the woods and playing Rambo count as a party?" "No," Ben said, smiling at the image. Then he swallowed. "What about Victor?" "Victor," Michelle said, indecipherable emotions playing across her face. "He was more of a boyfriend." "Yeah," Ben said, trying to find the right question. Instead, he just stared. Michelle noticed. She dealt with troubled kids every day in her line of work, ones much more practiced at hiding their emotions than Ben was. "Has he been talking about Victor lately?" "Sort of," Ben said. "Last night, actually, when he was drunk. He even dug out some old photos. I don't mind. I know how important he was to Jace. Kind of cute, too, in his own way. Um, you're not jealous of him, Michelle said, a note of disapproval in her voice. No. Well, maybe. Seriously? Michelle said. It's not like he's going to show up and steal Jace away. I don't see how you could feel threatened by... Jace said he wanted Victor back, Ben said, getting defensive. When he was drunk. Not just like, oh, I wonder whatever happened to him. It would be fun to catch up. More like it pained him that they weren't together anymore. Michelle's eyes were wide. She considered this in silence. Then she exhaled. Jace has talked to you about Victor, right? Before last night, you know about him. Yeah. He was an important part of Jace's life. I know all that. Her expression said he didn't. Communication is crucial. Relationships can survive a lot. Infidelity, doubt, lies, ebbing passion, that all comes with the territory. But if there's one thing I've seen destroy relationship after relationship, it's communication shutting down. That's a death sentence right there. Ben sat up straight, his muscles tense. You're freaking me out. Good, Michelle said. I like you. No, I love you. I want you to be my brother-in-law someday. So if I'm scaring you, that's good, because I know you're smart enough to fix this. To fix what? Communication, Michelle repeated, crossing her arms over her chest. Not with me, with him. He opened his mouth to respond, then shut it again because she was right. The person he should be talking to was inside the house, trying to sleep off a hangover. How you doing? Said a loud voice, the kind Jace wouldn't be able to handle right now. Ben liked it, though, since the voice belonged to a great guy. Greg was at the kitchen counter, flipping steaks back and forth in flour. They've got you on cooking duty? Ben asked, moving closer to investigate. Yep, we're going to grill us up some food Missouri style. Ben laughed, then quickly looked away when Greg pushed the pan to the side and turned to face him. How are things back home? We haven't seen you lately. Been busy? Find a job yet? Ben studied the kitchen floor. No, still temping. I hate it. That's rough. Greg walked around him to rinse his hands in the sink. You should try real estate. People like you. That's half the battle right there. I think you'd be good at it. Not really my thing. Uh-huh. Ben noticed how scuffed the linoleum was around the stove, probably from so many people standing in that spot when cooking. How are you? Fine. Good. Yep. Greg cleared his throat. Can I ask you something? Sure. Do you have issues about making eye contact? Because I saw you talking to Michelle, and you were looking right at her. But with me, it's like I scare you. Ben felt his cheeks flush. He forced himself to raise his head, eyes traversing over the person he was speaking with. Freaking Greg. Why'd he have to be so handsome? Brown hair and eyes, which normally wouldn't be exceptional if not for the killer body, lopsided grin, and easy charm. Like scientists had distilled all the best traits from a slew of frat boys and removed the drunk asshole gene, creating the perfect guy. Except Ben already had the perfect guy. Who knew there could be two? It's the muscles, isn't it? Greg said, making them bounce. Go on, admit it. Ben covered his eyes and groaned in embarrassment. It's hard not to stare because, yes, you're good looking. And I don't want to creep you out, and I'm totally, madly, completely in love with your best friend, so don't get the wrong idea. Please. But yes, it's a little awkward. Greg guffawed. I'm used to it from Jace, don't worry. Ben lowered his hand. Really? Yeah. Occasionally I'd catch him looking at me that way, especially after he came out. He'd practically start panting, then his eyes would reach my face and he'd look a little nauseous. Instant cold shower. You've got a great face. Thanks, but I think it's because I'm me, you know? My body is one thing, but he's definitely not into me. Still, I always found it flattering. I can't remember the last time I caught him doing that, but it doesn't make me uncomfortable. Feel better? Barely, Ben admitted. I'd rather you check me out than feel like you can't look at me. I'll try to keep my eyes above your shoulders. Your loss, Greg teased. Wait until Jace hears about this. I'd bribe you to keep silent, but I'm totally broke. Greg chuckled again, turning to open cabinets until he found some spices. So what do you think of my hometown? I like it, Ben admitted. At least he had until the recent mystery. He realized it was cheating, but if anyone knew Jace's deep, dark secrets, one of his closest friends would. Then again, I feel a little left out. Everyone seems to know more about what's going on than I do. I hear you, Greg said. He was back at his steaks, shaking some kind of powder over them. When I first moved to Houston, I felt completely lost, like one of the Beverly Hillbillies. All it takes is a little time. Yeah, but small towns have more secrets. Greg looked at him. Do they? You tell me. He seemed to think about it. Then he leaned forward and spoke in a soft voice. Don't tell anyone, but I'm sleeping with my best friend's sister. Ben felt disappointed, but forced a smile. Did that cause tension between you two? No, Greg said, resuming his work. You know how Jace is. He's a laid-back guy. Doesn't have any demons. You can trust him. Greg put enough emphasis on this to prove the conversation hadn't gone over his head. Ben was glad for the reassurance, but that wasn't the issue. The real question was if Jace felt like he could trust Ben. Family is great, especially during reunions when everyone is chirping nonstop like a tree full of birds on the first day of spring. But all that togetherness meant private time with Jace was difficult to find. Anxiety had settled in Ben's stomach and refused to leave. He was eager to dispel it, so when the afternoon rolled around and Michelle and her family returned to the house across the valley, Ben casually pulled Jace into the hallway. Can we talk? Sounds like we already are, Jace said, flashing him a smile. Feeling better? Jace nodded. Yeah, mostly. You know how when you drink too much, you crave the grossest food the next day? I need a gas station burger. Let's go get one. Ben didn't hide his concern. Are you sure your stomach can handle that? You barely touched lunch. I know it's counterintuitive, but it's exactly what I need. What did you want to talk about? This and that. We can talk on the way. Sounds good. Jace patted his pockets to find the car keys. Once he had them in hand, he led the way to the front door. There's someone else I want you to meet while we're out. Really? Ben said, his mouth feeling dry. Who? Someone important to me. It's a surprise. Victor, who else could it be? Making an issue of him now, just before they were about to meet, would be beyond awkward. Ben avoided the subject once they were in the car and instead asked about Jace's childhood. This led to more stories from his youth, but Ben found these difficult to concentrate on, paying only enough attention to listen for one name in particular. That was silly, though, because all he had to do was stop playing games and ask. Jace. The car took a sharp left turn as they pulled into a parking lot. Here we are! Jace was grinning like mad. I hope he's working today. The person we're supposed to meet? Ben asked incredulously. Yep. He's in there? Jace laughed. Don't sound so nervous. He's family. Come on. Oh, okay. Not Victor, unless that's how Jace described their closeness these days. When they entered the store, Ben scanned the interior for a dark mohawk and mismatched eyes. He didn't see anyone matching that description. A loud greeting and happy laughter drew his attention. Jace was hugging someone, and he definitely wasn't Victor. The man was old, his black skin leathery, his hair white and thin. He was wearing a pair of overalls that were filled by a big belly. Even after the hug ended, he still held Jace's hand a moment, eyes shining as he looked him over. What a nice surprise, the man said. Don't tell me you finally decided to accept my offer. You'll move home and run the store. Afraid not, Jace said. My work is in the sky, and my home, he turned and nodded at Ben, is with this guy. The older man noticed him, face lighting up. "This is him? This is Ben?" "Hi," Ben said sheepishly, offering a hand. "Nice to meet you, son. I'm Bernard." "You can call him Bernie," Jace said, an edge of teasing in his voice. "That's the name on the store outside. Must be there for a reason." "Call me whatever you like," Bernard said easily. "I just hope you've heard half as much about me as I have you." Ben racked his memory. "Didn't you drag him out of a river once?" "Like a cold, dead fish," Bernard laughed, patting Ben's hand a few times before finally releasing it. "You should have seen his face. I made him take a shower when I got back to my camper, mostly because I was certain he had shit himself." "You see," Jay said, "this is why he's family. Only relatives can humiliate each other with such swift precision." "We are indeed family," Bernard said, "although you'd never guess it to look at us." Ben smiled. Jace went to get his microwave burger, leaving them alone. "Memories can make the past seem so near to us," Bernard said. "Seems like yesterday he was just an ornery, messed up teenager. But when I see the man he's become, it feels like 1,000,000 years have gone by." "I wish I could see him like that again," Ben said. "It's hard to imagine. Jace has it so together." "I'm glad to hear it, but he's had his rough times just like we all do. And look at you." Bernard patted him on the shoulder. "I think Jace has finally found his happily ever after. Am I right?" "I hope so," Ben replied, face flushing a little. "I'm trying not to mess it up." "You better not. You hear me?" Bernard's eyes, faded with age, were dead serious. "Geez, no pressure," Ben said, chuckling to relieve tension. Bernard laughed with him to show he'd only been kidding. "No pressure at all. Just know that I'll be at your wedding. Have you set a date yet?" "Why does everyone keep talking about marriage?" Jace hollered from the other side of the store. "This microwave is filthy, by the way. I never let it get this dirty." "You know what to do," Bernard replied, seeming pleased when Jace went through a door marked employees only. "He used to work here?" "Oh, yes," Bernard said, "although sometimes he got paid for standing around and socializing with that friend of his." "Greg?" "Victor. Eventually he started working here too. Victor never worried about the microwave getting dirty, though, too lost in his own thoughts. I always liked that about him. Not good for the business, but the world needs dreamers." Great. Victor had punky sex appeal, had been Jace's first love, and was a thinker. He probably had a cool artistic job like writing plays or managing bands. "What's he do these days?" Bernard appeared startled. "Victor?" "Yeah, assuming he doesn't work here anymore." "Son, Victor passed away a long time ago. I'm surprised you didn't know that." A pit opened in Ben's stomach, more than one emotion plummeting into the depths. He felt foolish for not knowing, wounded that Jace had never confided in him, and sad for a man he had never met. While not proud of it, he also felt a sting of animosity. Victor had been the first to win Jace's heart, would always have a place there, and that was okay. But now he knew that Victor's name was carved into Jace's heart, his death cutting deeper emotionally than Ben ever could. Jesus, had they still been together when it happened? "Death always comes as unwelcome news," Bernard said, studying him, "even years after the fact. Must be hard for Jace to talk about. I'm sure he'll tell you in his own time. Best to let it happen that way, if you understand what I mean." Ben did. He wasn't supposed to know about this yet. But when would Jace tell him? Wasn't 3 years enough to establish trust? How long was Jace going to wait? Still, none of this was Bernard's fault. Getting mopey about it now would be rude. "I don't know if you'll thank me for this," Bernard said, "but you're welcome to any food in the store, if you're hungry." "I'd rather hear more stories about Jace when he was a teenager," Ben said. spotting him returning from the back room. The more embarrassing, the better. Oh, I've got a few of those. Like the time I got a call from one of my regulars that I needed to hustle to the store because something was wrong with my clerk. It was around midnight, if I remember correctly. And I show up in a fit to find Jace draped across the counter, snoring his head off. "What are you talking about?" Jace asked, working on cleaning the microwave. "Nothing." Bernard lowered his voice. Lord knows how long Jace had been sleeping, but there was a small pile of cash next to him with notes from customers saying what they had bought. God bless this town. You'll never find more honest people. Imagine what would happen in Houston if people walked into a gas station and found the clerk asleep. "Clearance sale," Ben said. "The kind where everything is free." So nobody tried to wake him? At least one person did, but he had taken sleeping pills. "No, you don't," Jace said, hurrying over, the microwave humming behind him. "I'm not letting you tell that story. You make it sound bad when it just so happens I had been studying really hard." "And staying out late," Bernard said helpfully. "Anyway, I had a headache, and so this genius helps himself to the sleeping pills." Bernard jerked his thumb at an end cap full of medicine. "They were aspirin," Jace said. "And yes, sleeping pills too. The box said PM on it, and I thought it meant they worked better at night, somehow." "Makes perfect sense," Ben said, trying not to laugh. "Still, are they really that strong?" "If you take double the recommended dose," Bernard supplied. "It was a bad headache," Jace said. "I did sleep really well, and I got paid for it, so the joke's on you, old man." "The joke is watching the old security footage of you drooling on the counter." Jace stiffened and his eyes went wide, just as the microwave dinged. "There were security cameras? Seriously?" "Judging from that guilty expression," Bernard said, "I can only imagine what else you got up to. And no, there weren't cameras, but now I wish there had been." Ben laughed, feeling more relaxed. Bernard kept telling stories, most of them harmless, because Jace clearly had a good life while growing up. Maybe that made talking about the darker moments more difficult. Ben would wait, but until Jace decided to open up to him, he would still feel like they were both haunted by Victor's ghost. Ben adopted the thinker pose, matching the sculpture by Rodin, as he often did when in this room. He wondered if Rodin had come up with the idea while seated on the toilet himself, because it sure suited the occasion. Ben took his time, enjoying the solitude, having grown weary of the constant social interaction after another night with his potential in-laws. The idea made him smile, even though that future now seemed less certain. When finished, he checked himself in the mirror, washed his hands, then went into the upstairs hallway where he had retreated for extra privacy. Not that he really needed it. Jace and his parents were out on the balcony, soaking up the sun. A family ritual, it would seem. That's why he felt puzzled when hearing the shuffling of paper in Jace's old room. Ben poked his head inside and found a little girl seated at the desk, her face solemn as she brought piles into order. "Emma, what are you doing here?" "I'm playing president," she replied. He walked into the room. "Is your mom here?" "Nope." "Your dad?" "Nuh-uh." "Does anyone know you're here?" "No. I walked over by myself. I needed alone time." He could relate to that. "You can stay," she added. "I like you, Uncle Ben." He perched on the edge of the desk, watching her move papers around. "So what are you doing? Signing bills into legislation? Repealing laws your predecessor worked hard to enact?" "Is that what presidents do?" "When not telling the military to blow things up, yes." "Then that's exactly what I'm doing." Ben tapped an old water bill. "Sign here, please. And here." As they whiled away the time in this manner, Ben observed Emma when she was distracted. She was a little overweight for her age, and sometimes solemn when around her brothers, But otherwise, she was bright and talkative. Speaking of which, "What am I to you?" he asked. "Me and Jace, what are we?" "Ma uncles." Ben nodded. "Right. But it's actually said differently. Uncle. You say it." "Uncle." Demonstrating the proper pronunciation of the word obviously wouldn't be enough, or someone would have already corrected her. "What's a soldier do in battle?" "Fight." "And sometimes in the really bad battles he has to—" Emma caught on. "Kill." "Which is sad," Ben said, "because someone probably loved the person who was killed, making them wish it could be undone, so that the dead guy could be unkilled." Emma made a face. "Is that a real word?" "If we want it to be, you say it." Now Emma looked offended. "Unkill," Ben tried. "I'm Unkill Ben. Get it?" Emma sighed. "I know how to say uncle." Ben's jaw dropped. "Then why don't you?" "Because it's cute. Everyone makes a big deal when I say it all dumb like that." "So you've been playing us this whole time?" Emma returned to signing random pieces of paper. "People like it when I'm cute." "Okay," Ben said. "Fair enough. You know my sister, your Aunt Karen?" Emma made a repulsed face. "Exactly. My mom used to put a bow in her hair when she was little. A great, big, red thing the size of her head. I've seen photos, and sure, it was cute. She must have gotten a lot of praise for that bow because she kept wearing it into her teens. Imagine Karen in glasses with braces and pimples, 15 years old, and she still has this stupidly huge bow in her hair. Instead of people thinking she was cute, they started making fun of her. Enough that she finally stopped. Maybe Karen actually liked the bow because, let's face it, she's got bad taste. But if you're only talking a certain way so people will like you, try being yourself instead. In the end, that's what people will respect most. They'll like you for being who you really are." Emma studied him briefly, then continued playing with her papers. He wasn't sure if any of his lecture had sunk in. Not until they decided to join the others on the back deck. Emma greeted her grandparents first. Then she turned to Jace. "Uncle Jace," she said, "I'm the president now." Jace appeared startled, then delighted. He picked up Emma and swung her around, kissing her face until she started laughing and protesting. "He'd make a great father," Serena murmured from next to him. "You both would. Do you ever think about having children? Is that something you want?" "Eventually," Ben said. "I still have to get my own life figured out and find a real job first." He watched how happy Jace seemed, how his eyes sparkled as he continued to tease his niece. "Maybe someday." "Want to go for a walk?" Ben looked up in surprise at the offer. Jace's expression was pensive, perhaps because it had been another full day. Michelle and Greg had come searching for Emma once they noticed her missing, bringing the two boys with them. After hours of conversation and eating, all Ben wanted to do was bask in the silence now that everyone had gone. The house was finally quiet. Even the television was off. All he could hear were the sounds of whiskey on ice and the occasional turning of a magazine page as Jace's parents unwound. Ben was playing on his laptop, but his boyfriend's eyes were hopeful and waiting for an answer. "Okay, let's go." The sun was already setting as they walked down to the lake. Ben imagined they would sit on the dock and listen to the sounds of nature. Instead, they skirted around the water's edge and entered the woods. "Do you know where we're going?" Ben asked, blinking in the increasing gloom. "Of course," Jace said. "Don't worry. You're safe with me. I won't let any bears get you." "Ha!" Ben walked a few more steps, then glanced behind him when he heard the underbrush rustling. "There aren't any bears in Missouri." "Are there?" Only one way to find out. Jace seemed confident, never hesitating as he guided them deeper into the woods. Eventually they reached a clearing, the open sky above them burnt orange, the first stars already twinkling from trillions of miles away. Jace walked slower, as if inspecting his surroundings, but Ben couldn't see much of anything, just leaves and dirt. Jace spotted something, though, and bent to lift a thick branch, brushing away debris and revealing torn canvas tied around one end. "I wonder if someone knocked it down," Jace said. "Or maybe it was the weather." "Did you have a treehouse here? Or a fort?" Jace seemed surprised by Ben's presence. He dropped the branch and stood upright. "I'm sorry about the other night," he said. "That must have been uncomfortable for you." Ben swallowed. "I wasn't sure you remembered." "It's blurry," Jace said. "I believe I got upset about Victor being nothing more than a box, am I right?" "Yeah." Ben tried to smile reassuringly, but Jace looked so solemn that he didn't manage. "What is this place?" "This is Victor," Jace said, gesturing around him. "Not that box, not those trinkets. This is where he really is. This pile of wood used to be a shelter. The original one was on that side, actually. Victor would camp out in this clearing. His way of being close to me. A lot happened here. This is where I came out to Greg, but only because Victor forced me to. Asshole." He said this with warmth in his voice and a subtle smile. "This clearing is where I first confessed my feelings, first kissed another boy, and, everything. It happened right here. This is even where I said goodbye." Jace turned to face him, half his face glowing orange from the last light of the day, the rest lost in shadow. His voice wavered when he spoke. "This is Victor's final resting place. He died a long time ago, Ben." He didn't know how to respond. No words seemed adequate. He felt like taking Jace into his arms, but not here. Somehow it was too sacred. He felt as though he was trespassing. Jace turned away, scuffing at the ground with his foot, still digging for the past. "I never told you because I didn't want it to be true. The first time you asked me a question about Victor, I don't even know what it was anymore. Nothing unusual, but you phrased it like he was still alive, and I didn't want to contradict you. I wanted to believe it was true. To pretend." Ben swallowed. "What happened? Am I wrong to ask?" Jace took a deep breath and exhaled. Then he told Ben everything. At first he talked about the good times, like he was still denying anything had ever gone wrong. Then he spoke about their time apart and how they had found each other again. The story was familiar in many ways, not so different from Ben's own. Except the end was ugly. Jace cried as he revealed the details. Ben joined him because he could only imagine that level of pain. For one fleeting instance, he wished he could check on Tim, not to chase after any unresolved feelings, but just to make sure he was okay, that he was still flashing his winner's smile and behaving like the world belonged to him. But mostly Ben hurt for Jace, knowing no way to comfort him. Some pain is permanent and deep. Ben looked around the clearing, trying to imagine everything that had happened there. "Where is he buried?" "Not buried," Jace said. He crouched, touching the tips of his fingers to the leaves. "I scattered his ashes here. No one else knows that. Not my family, not Greg. Just you. I thought telling you might make up for having kept so much secret. And because I have a request." Ben clenched his jaw, but not because he was angry. "What?" "If anything ever happens to me—" "Okay," Ben said, holding up a hand to stop him. "I get it. You don't have to say it out loud." Jace studied him. "You'll do it?" "Yes. Now can we please go somewhere else so I can kiss you?" "What's wrong with here?" "It seems disrespectful." Jace smiled. Because of Victor? Are you kidding? He would love it. Ben made a face. Seriously? Yep. I'll spare you one of his lectures because basically they all boil down to giving in to your feelings instead of denying them. Ben held out his hand. Sounds like my kind of guy. Jace came close, took Ben's hand and pressed it to his heart. I love you, Ben. More than anything. I hope you know that. I love you too. A moment later, all the negative emotions that had clung to Ben fled, chased away by a single kiss. The car was blissfully silent as they drove through Warrensburg, neither of them speaking until they reached the city limits. Funny how these visits work, Jace said. We have our own lives now, but whenever we want, we can return home and rediscover the past, like a museum where most of the exhibits are broken, dusty, or straight up missing, but there's still enough there to remind you of how it used to be. Once it gets too painful or boring, you get to leave it all behind again. Not all of it, Ben said mysteriously. He didn't clarify, not even when Jace shot him a questioning expression. In one corner of his suitcase was an old shoebox. In it rested a wooden lion, a notebook, some photos, and a battered Zippo lighter. They were taking Victor home with them. A little piece of him, anyway. He hoped Jace would discover the box someday and feel glad about it. Until then, Ben would set it next to a box of his own, one that also held trinkets belonging to a dusty corner of his heart. So you like my parents? Jace said. They didn't drive you crazy? I love them. Your whole family, actually. I wouldn't mind becoming an official member. Ben cleared his throat. Somehow. Jace grinned. Why does everyone keep talking about marriage? We've got a few adventures left before that happens. Open the glove box. Now it was Ben's turn to look puzzled. Go on, Jace prompted. Otherwise I'll forget they're in there, and someone from the rental company will get a paid trip to... You'll see. Ben opened the glove compartment and found a pair of airline tickets. They weren't for the flight home to Austin. He read the destination and came close to crying. Paris? Yep. As in France? I don't mean Paris, Texas. But we always said... Ben trailed off, not wanting to jinx it. Said what? Jace asked, focusing on the road. We take an international trip every spring. That we eventually visit Paris was inevitable, right? Yeah, Ben said, reaching over to take his hand. It's definitely meant to be. A lonely flight. Then a rental car, the interior silent. GPS and a map were his guide now, instead of a comforting presence behind the wheel. Ben cruised down time-worn roads, passing a rickety gas station where an old man polished the glass door, his back to the street. He continued through neighborhoods filled with small homes and narrow yards, the memories that had been made there no longer spoken aloud. When Ben reached the lake, he stopped, not daring to enter the subdivision where he might be recognized. He walked along the far edge of the shore where no houses were built. Overgrown brush and muddy ground made this difficult, but he pressed on. The woods were dark when he entered, more than one ghost needing to guide him if this was going to happen. If he found it, it would be a sign. If not... Ben stepped into the clearing. He wasn't sure at first. So many years had gone by, and it had been just 1 hour among all the others they had shared together. He took off his backpack and carefully set it on the ground. Then he walked around the edges of the clearing, getting on his hands and knees to be sure. There it was, the broken remnants of a shelter. He walked to the center of the clearing and knelt in front of the backpack, feeling guilty when his fingers touched the cardboard box which held a sealed bag. Not where the ashes normally resided, but he had to fly, and the airlines had guidelines about such things, which was maddening. All of this felt so crazy that he considered gathering everything up and heading home. But he knew why he really wanted to leave. His reasons were selfish. I'm sorry it took me so long to do this, Ben said. I didn't want to let go of you. I still don't." He waited for a response, or maybe some ghostly apparition to appear. When neither of these things happened, he opened the box and tore open the bag inside. "I don't know how you want me to do this. I wish I had been braver and let you tell me. The thing was, back then it was so unthinkable that I'd ever be standing here. Still is. It's been years, Jace. You've been gone for years." Ben hung his head and let the sorrow pass through him, feeling a weird sort of panic when he saw that some of his tears had created wet indentations in the ashes. Then again, maybe that was appropriate. One last union between them on the physical plane. He tilted the bag, carefully pouring the ashes on the ground, forming a circle. No beginning and definitely no end. "Forever," Ben said, placing an open hand in the middle of the circle, his palm flat on the ground. That's when he heard it. The echo of words spoken long ago and nearly forgotten. He repeated them just so they never would be. "I love you. I hope you know that." He remained still, lost in memory until he grew cold. Then he picked up his things, leaving behind only that which now belonged there. He experienced a moment of concern, worrying about Jace being alone, but then remembered he wasn't. This clearing wouldn't be a lonely place for him or for Victor now that Ben had finally kept his promise. He walked back to the car, got behind the wheel, and collected himself enough that he could drive away. But before he turned the key to the ignition, he noticed the phone on the passenger seat, a blinking icon informing him that he'd missed a call. Ben looked at the name, feeling uncomfortable about seeing it here. Then he pushed a button and pressed the phone to his ear, listening until ringing was replaced by a familiar voice. "Hey," Tim said. "Tomorrow's the big day. Our first house." "I'm aware of that." "Are you okay? I know you wanted the day to yourself, but I had this feeling like..." "Like what?" Ben asked. "Like maybe you needed me." Ben smiled and shook his head ruefully. "Maybe I do." "Yeah? Do you miss me?" "Yeah." "Really? How much?" "A lot less than a few seconds ago," Ben said testily. Okay, Tim said hurriedly. "Sorry. I'll let you have your space. Just promise me you'll be there tomorrow." "Don't worry," Ben said. He looked out across a lake, at woods where love had been made, stories had been told, and dreams were laid to rest. Then he started the car. "I'm coming home." This has been Something Like Stories, Volume 1, Something Like Book 7. Written by J. Bell, narrated by Kevin R. Free at Brickshop Audio. Copyright 2015 by J. Bell. Production copyright 2015 by J. Bell.